My earliest encounter with police officers where they stopped me, they frisked me, was when I was 13 and I was coming back from the gym.
Officers came out of the bodega and began to question me as if I was a drug user. And for me, it kind of didn't make any sense because here I am sort of in a tie and a shirt, and I'm telling them and explaining to them I work across the street at a school.
With that particular stop, myself and other two people who were with me were actually attacked, thrown to the ground.
They kept asking me over and over again, like, oh, if I search you, you won't have contraband?
They said that one of us matched the description of someone who had committed a crime, and they frisked us and then they let us go.
The U.S. Constitution says that officials of the government, including police officers, are not allowed to stop people on the street to deprive them of their liberty and search them and question them unless they have what's called reasonable suspicion of criminal activity.
Derived from case law that an officer may pat down the outer clothing of someone during an interaction when they have reason to believe that that person may be armed. So for safety and safety only, that is what stop and frisk is about.
The situation we have in New York is that we have police officers who are not suspecting people necessarily of any kind of violent crime, but they are asking them questions on the street. They're sometimes patting them down, sometimes going into their pockets, sometimes asking them to empty their pockets, and very rarely actually finding any indication of criminality.
The police are primarily targeting people of color and other marginalized groups for stop and frisk, and they're doing it on the basis of these people's status as people of color and marginalized populations, and that's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution.
The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution states,
"No state shall make or enforce any law
which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States,
nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property,
without due process of law,
nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction
the equal protection of the law."
We say it's not racial profiling, but ironically, in August I had a convening here in New York City where folks who came from the United Kingdom to talk about racial disparities in police-initiated stops find the same phenomena there, that their non-white populations are substantially more likely to be stopped by the police, even in places where their actual numbers in the general population was extremely low.
Hundreds of thousands of times a year, the police are stopping people on the street for no other reason than the fact that these people live in a so-called high-crime neighborhood. Not because of anything that these individuals are doing themselves, which is suspicious or illegal, but simply because they live in a place the police have decided is high in crime.
They're not putting the same amount of pressure on white teenagers, male or female, by Columbia University. They're not doing the same thing on the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side.
See, these aren't gated communities that they go into, golf club communities that they go into. These are impoverished areas that they go into, and they search people, violating their Fourth Amendment rights.
At any moment, they can violate you. They can throw you up against the wall. They can take your hat, throw it on the floor, step on it, handcuff you, embarrass you in front of your friends and your family, and there's nothing you can do about it.
did they come over here to stop you?
They was just saying that we were selling and stuff. I don't understand this.
And you guys were just sitting here before that?
Yeah, we were just sitting, and we weren't doing nothing. We were just smoking a cigarette, and that's all.
And then what did they say? Why did they say that I saw they were taking out your IDs and stuff. What was the reason for that?
I don't understand. I don't know why.
So they just came up here and started bothering.
They didn't even let us know what was going on or what is it.
This is more than just a minor inconvenience for folks. You know, we're talking about police not only stopping you, but putting their hands on people, putting their hands in people's belongings. This is happening to some folks dozens of times a year, if not more. And it's really, I think, a frightening and intimidating experience for people.
I've been stopped plenty of times, probably like 20 times or more. I really don't like it, especially with I'm carrying my daughter and I have to be stopped and frisked by NYPD. I don't think it's fair to me or my daughter or my husband.
I'm paranoid, scared, and terrifying to see those guys, because if I'm walking on the street, I better rush to a public place and run away from them, because I know I can get arrested for just walking on the street. Because if I'm walking with my friend, they just assume that I'm a prostitute, that I'm a sex worker, or just because I'm a Hispanic transgender woman, because of my gender, I can just get arrested. It made me feel violated, humiliated, harassed, shameful, and of course, paranoid, and I don't trust the NYPD anymore.
I was on the way to see my daughter and my grandson, and I was stopped, by NYPD flashing lights, and I was pulled over, and I stopped, and 3 policemen came to my car with their hands on their guns, one on the left, one on the right, and one in the rear, and asked for my license and registration. Ultimately, I gave that to them. They told me to step outside the car. I stepped out the car. I said, listen, you can pat me down. I don't want you sticking your hands in my pocket or frisking me or anything, and you cannot frisk. I do not give you permission to search my car. And then they moved me to the back of the car, and as soon as they moved me to the back of the car, the officer that was in the front went right into my car, went to search him. They handcuffed me, and they took me to the police precinct, where I stayed for 3 days, from Friday night to Sunday night, without food, water, or medication for my high blood pressure. I'm 70 years old. I'm born in 1941. Yeah.
When talking to people who have been stopped by police officers, is that they're power tripping. They act like gangs. Very territorial, very disrespectful toward anyone who isn't one of them.
Young people are afraid to be on the street. Young people think that they don't have the right to, and these are young people of color, don't have the right to move about the city freely. They are resentful of the fact that they are suspected of criminal activity even when they are not engaged in criminal activity.
As a black man, there are just certain things that I should not do that would lessen the chances that I would get stopped. Having experienced being stopped over and over again, experiencing police officers constantly harassing other people, and their presence, just the fact that they're there in large numbers and they're constantly slowing down to check out, what you look like, if you fit any particular description, or, so forth, so on. It gives you a sense that I shouldn't even be outside.
One thing we've seen over the last few years is a real increase in the number of civilian complaints for stop and frisk. The Civilian Complaint Review Board puts out reports every year, and I believe if you look over the last 3 or 4 years at the complaints and what they're for, you'll see a rise from about 5% of the complaints were for stop and frisk to, I think, over 30% as of last year. And I think what that shows is that this is a practice which is causing a lot of anger and resentment in many communities around the city.
If you have a free hand, I want you to raise one if you've heard of Stop, and Frisk.
I want you to raise one if you've heard of Stop, and Frisk.
I want you to raise the other if you know someone who has been stopped and frisked.
I want you to raise the other if you know someone who's been stopped and frisked.
This is how NYPD
kills us.
Then they handcuffed both of us. Made us sit on the sidewalk. While they searched the vehicle. I hate being represented like that in front of my community.
You know, you don't feel safe when you know a few of your friends have been arrested and taken out of school and embarrassed and treated like criminals before they're teenagers. It gets really hard to then fix and amend that relationship with police officers.
That creates in the people themselves sort of feelings of anger, feelings of distrust, feelings of hate, which the police then turn around and use as reasons for stopping folks and for arresting folks. So if you see a police officer, you're like, I don't want to deal with this officer because he's going to ask me the same questions. Then you turn around, they'll use it as a pretext to stop you, saying, oh, well, you know, the kid was walking down the block and then he turned around, you know, and so I'm taking that as, you know, he's avoiding me, or, you know, he didn't give me eye contact, or, you know, she was being real loud and belligerent when I was talking to her.
The police really have to rely on members of the community to help them find out where the crime is and where the bad guys are. And the problem with Stop and Frisk is that it's causing so much resentment and mistrust of police in certain communities that it's making these communities much less likely to cooperate with the police.
If we have a system in place that pits the police against the community, that means the community will not cooperate with the police to resolve the kinds of serious crimes that arguably we want the police really to be able to resolve.
It diverts important law enforcement resources from addressing the issues of violent crime, from addressing the issue of rape, addressing the issue of domestic violence, burglaries, robberies that we have.
There is not necessarily, and the criminologists have not been able to establish that there is a connection between the one phenomena, stop and frisk, and the decline in crime, the other phenomena. And so just because you say the two things together doesn't really mean that they're related.
There was a case in Indianapolis a few years ago in which the police department used random traffic checkpoints to look for drugs. And the hit rate on those checkpoints, in other words, the percentage of those stops that resulted in discovery of drugs, was actually higher than the hit rate for stop and frisk with respect to finding guns and contraband, which suggests to us that if the NYPD just randomly stopped people, they would do no better than they're doing now under the supposed reasonable suspicion standard, which further suggests that it doesn't seem they're actually using reasonable suspicion at all. Every time an officer stops and frisks somebody, they're supposed to fill out a form which is called a UF-250 form. And on that form, there are a list of boxes that they can check off, which are the purported reasons why they stopped the person. But some of these reasons are so vague and subjective that they, don't really tell us much about what the officer actually observed. And on their face, we believe are actually not enough to constitute reasonable suspicion.
One of the things that the increased use of stop and frisk in urban minority poor communities has done is to expose young people, particularly young males, to a greater likelihood than their white counterparts of being a part of the criminal justice system, either in terms of probation and then ultimately ending up in a prison or jail.
In the United States, we are 6% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's prisoners. And when these people get out of prison, they can't find jobs, they can't get housing, they can't get assistance to go to school.
The prison population in America expanded from 100,000 to 2.4 million. 2.4 million. This is after the victories of the civil rights struggle. How do you explain that? And all of that was done by the criminal justice system.
You've got a diverse population of folks in New York City. Let's say that the number of marijuana-carrying individuals is equally distributed among the different ethnicities. Let's also say that the amount of marijuana is less than an ounce, which is the legal limit. Because cops are more likely to stop Black and Latino people over their white counterparts, those are the people that are more likely to be caught with what is really an insignificant amount of contraband. You've now got a higher amount of violations among that demographic, which will make them more likely to receive harsher penalties during later police encounters because they already have a record. As a result, you have a surplus of those folks in prison. And many times it goes back to the execution of a racially biased unconstitutional policy. You can replace Black and Latino with transgendered, with immigrant, with poor, with anyone this society considers marginalized.
Stop Frisk is, talking about zero tolerance. Zero tolerance for who?
Policing is a business, and it's a quota business, and so it comes down to trying to write the most tickets, trying to make the most arrests, trying to get the most felonies.
The situation that the department finds itself in now, although it has denied it on several occasions, is that they do, in fact, I teach police officers, so I know that they are required to have meet what are called productivity measures. Productivity measures, by any other names, are considered quotas, and quotas are against the law in, I think, every jurisdiction in the country. Because the notion is if you tell officers you have to bring in a certain number of, whether it's arrests, and in this case it's, UF 250s, that they will figure out a way to get or to meet that quota, and it may even be a threat to officer integrity.
When you're told by the hierarchy that you need to make more arrests, you need to make more drug arrests. If you don't want a poor evaluation, you have to lock more people up. If you want to go from patrol into the detective bureau, if you want to become a narcotics agent, you have to make drug arrests.
The problem is not just about a few bad cops who, are racist or don't know what the law is. We can't solve the problem by simply training the police again or hiring quote-unquote better cops. We're really talking about a philosophy, a culture of policing that is causing the problems that we see today.
There needs to be a real push for community members, community organizations to begin to define violence in a different way than we understand it now, because this is violence. It's a form of violence.
One of the sort of small steps as a way of people empowering themselves against police harassment, intimidation, and brutality is to know their rights in a police encounter. African Americans and Latinos themselves really need to make sure that they know what their rights are and how to handle themselves when they're in encounters with police.
So the crowd is going through now.
Know Your Rights and Cop Watch are two of the most effective ways for affected communities to ensure that the police treat them fairly and legally. Unfortunately, these methods also come with a certain amount of risk of retaliation by the police, who don't like when community members assert their rights and stand up for themselves. Unless elected officials, grassroots organizations, members of those communities most affected, and other advocates of civil rights and fairness, come out and really put the pressure on the police department from the outside to make changes, those changes aren't going to happen. We've seen over the last decade that if we just leave it up to the police department to make changes, change is not going to happen.